Good morning and welcome to Crack the Mic podcast with Agent of Change Corey Davis. And this week's segment is entitled Gun Violence in America. The issue, gun violence in America in recent years, have become so pervasive in our country that it has sparked controversy on both sides of the political aisle. In fact, whether you are a proponent of either restrictions or bans, the fact of the matter is this: most American cities recently have become more like a war zone. And to help me further this discussion, I have a very distinguished panel that includes, representing the Miami-Dade County Mayor's Office, Mr. Jason Smith, Director of Equity for the Honorable Daniela Levine Cava's administration. Also, Reverend Andre Green, board member for PACT, a social justice organization who's been fighting for justice in Miami-Dade County for over 30 years. Also joining the podcast, we have a former prosecutor with the Miami-Dade County State's Attorney's Office and managing partner with the Hager Law Firm, who's recovered over $250 million in verdicts and settlements, attorney Douglas J. McCarran. Also, last but certainly not least, Dr. Keon S. Payton, president and chairman of the Institute of Trauma for Economic Justice. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Morning.
According to an article published in The Guardian on May the 9th, 2023 by Iram Salam, titled, "The U.S. is on track to set record in 2023 for mass killings after a series of shootings." Now, he suggested the following: that the U.S. is on pace for 60 mass killings this year, whereas in 2019, there were 31, 28 in 2020, and 36 in 2022. Moreover, according to the article, Mr. Salam also suggested that the U.S. is seeing on average, more than one mass killings weekly. Now, let me just go ahead and delve in this conversation, if we may. Now, as of May the 7th, 2023, there had been 202 mass shootings in the USA. Now, let me just go ahead and ask this question, if I may, panel. In your opinion, why do you believe that gun violence is so pervasive in many of our American cities on today?
I'll start. And so, first of all, let me say to you, Dr. Davis, thank you for this very kind and generous invitation for us to come and to share, and certainly to each of the panelists, this distinct panel who is with us here tonight, I bring greetings. Again, my name is Dr. Keon Payton, and I am the president and CEO of the Institute of Trauma and Economic Justice. Our organization is designed to create greater awareness to the pervasive reality of untreated childhood trauma, more specifically, adverse childhood experiences. According to the Center for Disease Control, untreated trauma, untreated adverse childhood experiences is the lead cause to violence, substance abuse use here in America, as well as incarcerations and early deaths. And I personally feel that the pandemic has exacerbated the traumas that so many have been experiencing. Here in America, we have a number of traumas going back to the legacy of slavery here in America, where we are still working to address the historic nature of trauma here in our own country. But in addition, there you have poverty and so many other cyclical generational traumas that continue to plague so many communities, particularly urban and BIPOC communities. And I feel that if we're going to really address this comprehensively and substantively, we're going to have to take a better look at understanding the root cause, which again, according to the Center for Disease Control and so many other areas of and fields of study, we now know that the root cause to a lot of this is untreated trauma.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that sentiment, Dr. Payton. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts on that question, Mr. Smith?
Well, certainly. And again, I'm Jason Smith, Director of Equity in the office of our County Mayor, Daniela Levine Cava. And certainly, you rightly pointed out, in a lot of American major cities, the rates of gun violence have gone up. But here in Miami-Dade County, because we have put in place a system that and programs that really address the root causes of violence in our communities, Miami-Dade County has seen a decrease in the number of homicides and instances of gun violence. So we do know that while we have a strong Second Amendment and our Constitution is strong, that guarantees the right to bear arms, we do know that if we put in systems and programs in place, including trauma-informed care, and other issues that address prevention and the reentry of those individuals who are formerly incarcerated, that we can reduce the instances of gun violence in our communities. I'd just like to share with you one program that Mayor Levine Cava was able to champion in coordination with our Board of County Commissioners. And it was called the Peace and Prosperity Plan. And the plan, the genesis of the plan, was shortly after the mayor was elected in 2020. We saw a slight uptick in gun violence in our communities. And the commissioners, as well as the mayor and her administration, we came together and we really did a lot of research into best practices on how do we reduce those instances. And we came up with the Peace and Prosperity Plan. And the key areas of that plan include prevention, including job creation, internships for young adults and youth, support for families, and counseling. Again, along those lines of the trauma-informed care that were mentioned earlier. Entry programs for those citizens who are returning to society, as well as an alternative programming for those juveniles who may find themselves in caught up in the system, somewhere in the system. And then, of course, community revitalization. That's key. Making sure that our communities are safe. And then, of course, economic investment in housing and commercial and business development. All told, we're talking about, a sizable investment to the tune of millions of dollars for this Peace and Prosperity Plan. And the dollars and the programming is spread out equitably in the community, meaning that the core of the program is focused on those areas where we've had in the past high incidences of gun violence. And we have seen our gun violence, as I said earlier, abate, and we aren't experiencing the levels of gun violence as we've experienced in other cities.
Okay, we definitely want to thank you for that sentiment. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts on that question, Attorney McCorrin?
Oh, yes. Thank you. And thank you for having us. Again, my name is Doug McCarron. I am a former prosecutor, but that was when I was a little bit younger. I've been at the Haggard Law Firm for quite some time. And while I wasn't born in Miami-Dade County, I grew up here. And I grew up in Northwest Miami-Dade. I played Optimist ball at North Dade Optimist, right on the Norland, where Norland High School is. And, so I think I have a pretty good understanding, at least. Maybe not a complete understanding. I'm not that ignorant to think that I have a complete understanding, but I have a good understanding that I grew up with a lot of great people and a lot of great families. And I played sports, and never had a problem ever. And that was because of the people that were around, the coaches, the role models that we had. We had
Right.
one of my football coaches was a Miami-Dade Police Department sergeant. And he treated us all the same, which was bad. I mean, like he ran us and he did all that, but so I think I had a pretty level. My dad was a teacher. I had a pretty level-headed upbringing, and I saw a lot of different things. And when I got to the state attorney's office, I remember my godfather, who's my dad's best friend, he told me just do justice. That was his whole point. And he was a criminal defense attorney, and I took that to heart. And when I was there, I kind of just discussing what Mr. Smith just had to say. It's not about locking up young men and throwing away the key. It's trying to get them not to come back into the system.
Absolutely.
And when I was in juvenile, I had a judge that told me that exactly. He said, don't think you're coming in here and trying to run the show. I run the show, and I'm trying to make sure these kids don't come back.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was very important. And the fact is that at my time at the state attorney's office, with the blessing of my supervisors, we used the Miami-Dade boot camp program, and we try to get kids not to get back. And I think that's where these programs that are in, and all you folks that have these programs in place to help these young men and young women, is really where it's all at. And we need to obviously fund it, which is not that easy to do sometimes. Sometimes government can't do everything, and we need private donors and things like that. But I think the main point of everything that we're trying to do so we don't have gun violence, and I think what Miami-Dade County has done a pretty good job, relatively speaking, is getting to these young men and women at an early age, either through the parks, through the different types of the arts and things like that, because these kids have so much to offer. And I look at it always that the kid fails is because we failed them.
Absolutely.
Maybe not across the board, but that's really where it's, I think, why it's so important to be involved and try to, just try to help these young men and women, because they're our future, and they're the people that are going to make good or bad decisions. And we obviously want them to make good ones. A lot of what we do in my practice now is we help families of crime victims. These are mothers and fathers that have lost their son or daughter because of violence, and it's an extremely sad, sad meeting every time we meet with them. I hate meeting these families for the sole purpose of I'm always meeting them in a horrible situation.
Right.
And the fact is, the strength that they show and what they try to do to stop the violence is it's always amazing to me, and it gives us strength. So I really appreciate everybody here, because I know that you guys are on the front lines making sure things happen where we can give these kids hope, because it's there. And there's a lot of different programs out there, and I think it's important. I know of just one, the Battier Take Charge Foundation, where ex-Heat player Shane Battier, he's given, I think it's 30 or 40 kids a year from Central and Booker T. They get full rides to college, and that's just the hope that we need. We need more people like that are willing to give kids opportunities, because once you give them the opportunity, they're going to pay it back, so much, because the kids that I see, the students, they come back and they help the next generation, and that's what we need. We need that revolving situation where people that have been helped come back and they help, because they've been there, done that, and they know it's possible. And when young men and women see that, that's a person that grew up down the street from me, and look how that person's doing. That gives them the hope that they need, and that's why these programs are so important.
I definitely echo that sentiment. It definitely will take a village to raise our children of today. Okay, let's go ahead and pause for a commercial break. We want to go ahead and we got to take care of our bills. Let's go ahead and pause for a commercial break.
At Immaculate Home Healthcare, we recognize the important role home plays in healthcare, which is why we are dedicated to helping you and your loved ones heal at home. Together, we work with you, your physician, and family to help make the transition from hospital or facility care to home care a smooth one. Our team of highly skilled health professionals includes nurses, therapists, aides, and medical social workers that have been chosen for their compassion and commitment to care. They undergo rigorous background checks to ensure that only the most dependable and trustworthy staff serve you. People turn to our home health care for help with services like post-surgical care, wound care, chronic disease management, diabetes, pain management, and hypertension. Home health care costs less than hospital or facility care, and Medicare pays 100% for qualified patients. At Immaculate Home Health Care, we provide quality medical care in the comfort of home. Call us today at 561-372-9108 to discuss qualifications and payment options, or visit us online at www.immaculateHHC.com. We'll be happy to help.
All right, we want to thank our sponsors for their sponsorship. Okay. Now let's just get back to the conversation. Reverend Green, you want to go ahead and share your thoughts on that question, sir?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me this morning. Pretty much everything that everyone said is pretty, on spot. And also, Mr. Smith, the program that the mayor has is basically because of PAC. We were the ones who initiated, even though you changed the name, it's still still the same. Under Cure Violence, John Jay College, the Office of Neighborhood Safety, all those programs implement some of the things that you guys are now doing in Miami-Dade County that is curbing gun violence. And, it started under the mayor. We had meetings and things like that. I met with him and met with Mayor Levine Cava, and we talked about some of the issues to get the police department involved. And it's great to see that that program is working, because it has worked throughout the nation in the zip codes that they have implemented the programs in. Gun violence has been reduced. And it is for, the community to get involved, to teach these young men to, be responsible type of things. And then also, as the attorney was mentioning, the different programs, that you grew up with. I grew up with the same thing, the type of coaching and standards and things like that. And I remember about 5 or 6 years ago going to going there with the public relation, the attorney there, I can't think of his name right now, the public defender. He had a program that he was speaking on adverse trauma, that he was bringing it up. And all those things are relevant today. I think two of the main reasons that gun violence is pervasive in many of the communities in America today is basically, one is education, the lack of quality education in a lot of marginalized communities, and also economic development. These people are impoverished. And if those two things were eradicated, then probably you wouldn't have the anger and the violence in those communities, because it's not prevalent in other communities that have those type of situations. And I think poverty, housing, and education, my wife is a school teacher, 6th grade math teacher, and she tells me, about the problems that, these kids are in 6th grade and they can't even do 6th grade math. And then she calls the parents, and the parents don't even want to get involved. It wasn't like that in school, so, I think that those are a lot of this, stem to a lot of the problems, along with a lot of things that everyone has mentioned here on the panel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. But now let me just ask the question, because I'm hearing a recurring theme that seemed to continue to kind of just come out in every sentiment that's being shared. Economics, which we know it has greatly impacted, or the lack thereof have greatly impacted communities of color. But let me quite frankly ask this question, and if you can start us out with it, Dr. Payton, what do you think is the chief reason why, in addition, I know you said trauma, but in addition to adverse childhood trauma that we see that's very pervasive in African American and Latino communities. But in addition to, what would you add to, I guess, being one of the chief reasons why gun violence is so pervasive in just those communities?
In just the African American and the
And
Black
Latino.
community?
Yes, yes, sir.
Well, I think the accessibility, to unregistered guns in many of these communities where young men and women are easily able to acquire and purchase these guns on the street. I think that we need to do a better job of regulating the access to some of those. I know that there have been programs that law enforcement agencies over the years have tried to incorporate to get persons to turn in guns in various communities. I think there have been some success in regard to that, particularly when there is a monetary gifts that are assessed to persons turning in their weapons from the street. But I definitely think that in these types of communities, there has been over the years an influx of these weapons and guns on the street. And I also think that that's been tied to the narcotics that has been infiltrated into so many of these communities over the years, that to some extent the government has played a role in being a part of that unfortunate reality. And so I think that there are a number of complex realities that share a broader picture as to why that happens in so many communities, but certainly the level of access to these guns on the street, I think, is a problem.
Absolutely. That is powerful, Dr. Payton. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Attorney McCarran?
Sure.
Question?
I wouldn't be so ignorant as to say that I know what's going on in certain communities, especially with the fact that I haven't lived in there. I know I said I was from Northwest Dade. Now it's Miami Gardens, but back then it was just unincorporated Dade County. But we lived in an extremely middle class neighborhood, and while I knew a bunch of kids that I was friends with that may have came from the Scott Projects was around when I was a kid, and they closed them. And a lot of those kids came over to the Optimist Club and played ball with us. And then I went to high school in Little Haiti. So, and that was a true melting pot of Miami. It was probably a third white, a third Hispanic, and a third African American and Haitian. And like I said, I don't want to be presumptuous that I know, but I think what Dr. Payton is saying is probably spot on. I mean, when you have young men and women that don't see that they have any hope, they may turn to things that they shouldn't be turning to if they don't have the guidance maybe at home. My dad was a special education teacher, and he would sometimes come home and tell us about the fact that some of these kids really had no supervision when they got home, and that's, I don't know if that's pervasive in any community or not, but that's just my things that I've learned over the years, at least from in my just my personal upbringing. But I think that the drugs and the guns that are people can get on the street is why maybe that's happening. But I think really what it comes down to is that people really don't see that they have any other options, and that's what, again, going back to the programs, I think are extremely important, because I've seen white friends of mine that came from very privileged upbringings that got involved in drugs and doing things that you would never even imagine that they could do, because that's not who they were as a person until they got into it, into the drugs, and it changed their personality, it changed their direction in life, and it's a shame. And I think if they hadn't gotten into the drugs, then they wouldn't have gone down the path of violence or getting themselves in trouble, in serious trouble, and doing something that's really not who they are in their hearts. But the drugs take over, and they have no other hope. So, without being there and having the experience, it's very hard for me to say. But that's from an outside view, I guess, looking in. That's kind of how I see it. It's probably one of the reasons, like Dr. Payton had said.
Spot on, brother. All right. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts on that question, Mr. Smith?
So could you repeat the question again?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why is it that the issue, gun violence, is more pervasive in already marginalized communities like communities of color?
Right. Well, we certainly know that, no community has gone unscathed in this surge of violence across the nation. Um, from Las Vegas to Uvalde to Sandy Hook to Chicago to, Parkland. I think that this is a situation that we all have to pay attention to, not just, the Black and brown community, but white community, not just the rich community, but it knows no bounds.
Absolutely.
It knows no bounds. And that's why we do have to take a whole community approach to addressing this issue. And just like was said earlier, we need not only the government, but our philanthropic and social agencies and attorneys and advocates in the community to wrap their arms around our young people who may be susceptible to dealing with their conflicts, their interpersonal conflicts. They're taking it from Facebook or Instagram, and then they're taking those leaps and going into the streets.
Mm-hmm.
We gotta wrap our arms around our young people, whether they're Black, brown, white, or what have you, and give them alternatives to settling their disagreements with guns. So my hat's off to PACT, and I can name a number of the organizations that are out there. Circle of Brotherhood is one that we partner with as well. They are in the streets contacting these youth, putting their hands on the youth and letting them know, as well as the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence program.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Miami-Dade and Broward. They're letting these children know that there is another way, and you don't have to pick up a gun. Don't play with guns, definitely. And you don't have to resort to violence. So it is a whole community approach, and it starts with conversations like this, where you're bringing in not only government but our community organizations, community-based organizations to help address this.
Absolutely. But I want to just point out something. Forbes released the 15 most dangerous cities in the United States. And number 1, St. Louis, Missouri. Number 2, Mobile, Alabama. Number 3, Birmingham, Alabama. Number 4, Baltimore, Maryland. Number 5, Memphis, Tennessee. Number 6, Detroit, Michigan. Number 7, Cleveland. Number 8, New Orleans. Number 9, and the list goes on. Be as it may, all of those cities, surprisingly enough, are areas where there is a huge concentration of African Americans. So it is very pervasive in our communities of color. And whether we want to ignore that reality or not, that is a reality that we must face. It is very pervasive in our community. So I digress on that point. You want to go ahead and share your thoughts, Reverend Green?
Yes, I do. As you was mentioning, those cities, they are in Republican states, most of those cities. And one of the narratives that you hear out there about, you said it's pervasive in Black communities, there's more guns in communities that are not of color. And the narrative is that these blue states cannot govern because there's so much crime. Most of the states that you're talking about are red states, and they're governed by governors. So I think personally that it's the laws in the states that allow, these situations to occur. And a lot of it has to do with economics.
Absolutely.
A lot of it has to do with these social programs that those states want to cut out for the marginalized communities and rather give the tax breaks or give the advantages to the 1% and 5%. But as soon as you start talking about programs that will help these people to bring them out of this poverty situation, then they want to talk about the budget and how much money they're spending, but they never talk about all the money and the cut people that are at the top that have all the opportunities that are getting. And the reason why we have these problems is the lack of equity in these communities, the lack of a quality education, the lack of the resources to bring these people up out of these situations so that they're no longer fighting among themselves for scraps and things like that. And I think it's systemic in these red states that these cities that you're saying that are Black communities, it's not prevalent all over those states. It's just in those communities. And when you look at those communities, there are certain laws that are passed by the states that affect those people that allow them not to progress.
Okay, well, I digress on that point. I don't want to make it about a red or blue. I think it's a issue that's germane to our country and is something that needs to be adjusted. Definitely,
because it's something that is being said, and there's no really talking about it because it's like the 80-20 rule. You know, we focus on the things that are bad and not the things that are good. We pay more attention to the 20%. And it's just like what, Mr. Smith is talking about. You and I both know in the communities that are committing gun violence, 10 people? You understand? Committing most of the shooting in a community that has thousands and thousands of people, but that is brought more to the attention in that community than some of the other things are brought to the attention, and then when, people of color go through the system and they're tried, their sentences are a little bit more harsher. There's a lot more of the adverse trauma, Dr. Payton, that you're talking about that is influenced on the families of color. So it's almost like a no-win situation, until we get things changed. And that's through laws. That's through voting people in the office that has a conscience that will make decisions that would not look at political views, but look on what's best for everyone and find solutions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I digress on the point. Well, let me change the tides for a moment, if I may. Along with the loss of life, gun violence-related injuries exert a major burden on the U.S. health system, costing up to $2.3 billion annually. The overall economic burden exceeds more than $100 billion every year, according to many experts. Now, this number is amplified to an estimated $557 billion, according to a study released in July 2022, by Everytown for Gun Safety. Now, when you compile these things like long-term care, criminal justice system resources, loss of wages, lower work productivity, and diminished quality of life for victims and their families, then that number, again, like I said, it amplifies. So let me just ask you this question, if I may, Mr. McCorman. In your opinion, what is the main ideal of the burden of firearm violence in the United States?
As I said earlier, we have, for many years, we have been a voice for crime victims and their families, not only in Dade County, but also throughout the state. And also we've branched out in other parts of the country. And I think the real burden is on the families and the actual crime victims themselves. People forget about, the civil justice system in the sense of, in the criminal justice system, you're trying to find the bad person, the assailant, the person that did things. But in the civil case, we're trying to, most of the time, or many of our cases are just to provide medical care, just basic medical care for this person that was a victim of crime.
Mhm.
And sometimes, as you can probably figure out, if the gunshot doesn't kill the person, they are critically injured and they're going to have medical care needs for the rest of their life. You have spinal cord injuries, paraplegics, quadriplegics.
Right.
People are going to need attendant care. They're going to need ongoing medical care for the course of their life. And that's a burden. Many of our clients have qualified for government assistance in terms of Medicaid or Medicare, but some of them don't, and they really have nowhere to turn. So, I think just the toll it takes in, horrible situations, obviously, when, a child loses a mother or father that was the breadwinner of the family, and they don't have, they lost the most important person perhaps in their life, but they also lost the person that put a roof over their head and made sure they were okay. So you have that, but then you also have these crime victims that are just going to have medical care for the rest of their lives. So some of the things that have, not to make it very political, but some of the things that they just did in Tallahassee this last session was to basically give immunity, or try to give immunity, to apartment complexes that are basically, they provide a home and they get checks, but they let things happen on their property. And I think somebody said it earlier. I think it was you, Mr. Green. We all know, or anybody that opens their eyes knows, that most of the people that are committing the crime, it's a small percentage of the people that live in the community. So if you go to some of these affordable housing apartment complexes, then they're all throughout the state, but here in Dade County, 99% of the people that live there are doing the right thing, or trying to do the right thing.
Right.
And they're the victim of crime, because this landlord that's getting government checks from the federal government and the county government, and they're also you're subsidized with tax credits and things of that nature. They do nothing but line their pockets on the backs of the people that live there, and it's atrocious. And it's quite frankly, it's a sin. They look like and they went up there and they lobbied it and they got it. And we fought as hard as we could, and we did. Obviously, we had some legislators that were on our side, and we had crime victim after crime victim after crime victim going up to try to testify. They were given 30 seconds apiece. It was a travesty. And that's kind of what, it's just like what they just did with property insurance. And I don't want to get into all these things, but, next time a hurricane comes into one of our areas, people are going to be not understanding, like, what do you mean, the insurance company's ripping me off? And that's one of the main problems, I think, in society today. No one cares about things until it happens to them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And people have to start opening their eyes that, you say that you're, that you're religious, and that you believe in, Jesus, and you want to live, live your life in that way. But the fact is that you turn your back on so many people, and
Right,
it's a real shame. And a lot of it's done because of the almighty dollar, and it's an embarrassment to our society right now.
Right.
And we need to fix that. People have to start worrying and caring about other people that they might not identify with, and that is something that I think needs to happen. So I know I got a kind of a far field from your question, but I think it's the toll that's taking on the people that are victimized in terms of financial, and also you lose a loved one that was there to provide for you, not only just financially, but also spiritually, emotionally, and to help guide you to become a good, productive person in society. That's where we're taking a toll.
Absolutely. Well, guess what, guys? Unfortunately, we are out of time for this week's segment, Gun Violence in America. I want to thank my sagacious panel, Mr. representing the Miami-Dade County Mayor's Office, Mr. Jason Smith, Director of Equity and in the Daniela Levine Cava's administration. Also, I want to thank Mr. Reverend Green from PACT, a board member from PACT, also Dr. Keon Payton, and also attorney Mr. Douglas J. McCurran. Again, but we want you to like and share this video, and also tune in for next week for part 2. Again, this is your Agent of Change signing off with Crack the Mic. Peace.
Me and old Hal have been together for a long time. Recently, I realized that I could use some help with basic everyday tasks, but Hal depends on me, and I'm not going to leave him. I don't have to. Yes, that was good news, wasn't it, Hal?
Immaculate Home Health Care can give you the help you need so you can stay safely and comfortably at home from a few hours a day to round the clock. Call today for your consultation. 561-372-9108. 561-372-9108. Online at ImmaculateHHC.com.